Hi, welcome to the Upside. I'm your host, Paul Santinello. This is the show where we talk about all the good things that are going on in Longmeadow in our community. Today, I'm fortunate to have with me a member of the Finance Committee who we share our role on the Finance Committee. I'm the chair. He's the vice chair this year, Dr. Andrew Lamb. Thank you for coming in, Andrew.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We're not here to talk about budget. We're not here to talk about anything going on in town. We're here to talk about Andrew's latest book. It's called Repentance. And besides a full-time career and a member of the Finance Committee, Andrew has time to write. This is his third book. We'll talk about the other ones as well. But Andrew, why don't you tell us a little bit about what this book is about?
Yeah, sure.
And what brought you about to write it?
Yeah, so I studied history in college, specifically like military history, before I went to medical school. So I have a passion for American history, and particularly World War II. And so when I was in medical school and training, I was kind of like trying to find a way to indulge my creative side and convey a lot of history that I had learned. And my passion is for kind of finding a fascinating historical topic that not a lot of people may know about, something that maybe isn't that well known, but really deserves to be. And in this particular book, I had learned about this group called the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, which actually was the most decorated unit in U.S. military history. They were a group of Japanese Americans who fought with amazing valor in Italy and in France during World War II. And they were volunteers from Hawaii and from the internment camps like Manzanar and Tule Lake and Hart Mountain, places where the West Coast Japanese Americans had basically been taken from their homes, lost all their businesses, and basically incarcerated in camps. And so it was really an amazing story of sacrifice and honor. And these guys were basically fighting very, very diligently and very courageously because they wanted to prove themselves just as American, just as loyal as any other American. And it compelled them to make a lot of amazing decisions in the war. They won 21 Medals of Honor.
Wow.
52 Distinguished Service Crosses, 560 Silver Stars, 4,000 Bronze Stars. Maybe in the unit there were about 3,000 or 4,000 at any one time, but because of turnover, about 14,000 guys served throughout the war, and they won 9,486 Purple Hearts.
Wow.
That's a lot of sacrificial fighting. And there are a lot of them went on to do amazing things, like one of their most famous members was Daniel Inouye, who was a senator from Hawaii, the second longest serving U.S. senator in history. He won the Congressional Medal of Honor. And so this was a topic that I just felt like people would love to know about. But what I learned in medical school was that I don't really have time to write nonfiction books. I don't have time to travel. Like I wrote a book about World War II in China, and I didn't have time to travel to China or interview scores of veterans or do all the research. But I did have time to imagine things, imagine a story.
Yep.
And I could use that as a way to convey the history that I'm so passionate about to others in an entertaining way, so they kind of get really engrossed in this amazing story, but don't realize, wow, they're being exposed to all this amazing history that is really what I'm passionate about.
Okay. So you're telling me that while you were in medical school, you had no time to write a book and go research it, right? So that's good, because that means you were studying.
Well, I didn't have time to do the research for a nonfiction book, which is probably what I would have done if I didn't go to medical school. I would have done history, but I did have time to use my imagination when I'm, you could do it when you're, in particular, the idea for my first book came to me when I was sitting in the emergency room in the middle of the night, and the patient flow had died down, but I couldn't go to bed. I just had to be there. And I was just thinking, gosh, I've seen a lot of war movies. Maybe I can think of some great story that will help people understand what the Americans did in World War II in China, which is kind of like an unmined aspect of World War II, right? We all know about D-Day, Guadalcanal, Midway, but did you know that tens of thousands of Americans served in China?
No.
And and there was specifically a mission that the Americans went on in China that is really the kind of foundation of the history behind my book. There was something called the Dixie Mission, in which Americans who were very frustrated with the nationalists and Chiang Kai-shek, because Chiang Kai-shek wasn't really prosecuting the war against the Japanese that well, they heard about these freedom fighters in the north part of China. And these freedom fighters were Mao's communists. They had basically been driven after the Long March to this backwater up called Yan'an in northern China. And word was that they were fighting a guerrilla war against the Japanese. And they said, well, the enemy of our enemy is our friend. Let's go find these guys and maybe give them weapons and help them out. So they went up there, and these American Foreign Service officers especially were very, very impressed by these communists, you know. In the communist areas, people were very motivated. There was no people starving. It was totally different from the nationalist areas where people were literally, you know, there was poverty, banditry. To get people to fight, they basically had to kidnap them and put them in chains and march them to the front. There was a corruption. So they were actually fairly impressed by the communists, who seemed at the time like they were agrarian reformers. And they wrote many favorable reports back to the State Department about Mao and the communists. And of course, China became communist. And during the McCarthy era, all these guys who were our China experts, and many of them had actually been born in China because they were sons of American missionaries who had gone there in the turn of the century. And they were all lost their careers, well, not all of them, but many of them, because they were labeled by McCarthy to be communist sympathizers. So they're kind of these unsung American heroes. So there's a lot of great stories still left to be discovered in World War II.
So is writing your therapy kind of like get you out of the day-to-day grind, or how do you go about writing your book?
Yeah,
I mean, you
know,
think of an idea, but then you have to actually find the time to do that.
That's true. I mean, a lot of people ask me, when do I have time to do it? I think that when you're passionate about something, you just make time. You know,
Yep.
you know, for me, with our 4 kids, you know, like any parent knows, it's basically driving them all over the world. And but when you're there,
You're a taxi
you have
cab.
to, yeah, exactly, you're an Uber driver. But you can, you know, I've been to a zillion interminably long swim meets,
Yeah.
and you just find a corner and start writing, or after my kids go to bed, you do it, or during your lunch hour, you know, you just make time, you know. And it's not like you're constantly writing. Like, these books take years. They're long hiatuses where you don't do anything in the middle of it. So, you know.
So you don't set a time. You don't say every morning at 8 o'clock I'm going to have my coffee.
Not
and write my
anymore.
book.
I
No.
mean, mostly these days I'm binge watching Game of Thrones or like The Americans, you know. But if I get an
keep it real,
idea,
right?
when I get an idea, then it just like pours out of you. You know, it's
Yeah.
kind of like you
can't
do want to
stop
do
it,
it.
yeah.
So in that way, it's great because it doesn't feel like work. But the flip side is that good ideas aren't always easy to come by. So
Yeah. So when your process, you start with your book. Obviously, you go send it into an editor, come back, and they
Right.
say yes, no, this does, you know, change this or change that.
well, there's several steps before that.
Okay,
So,
right.
good question.
So what's the when you have that first idea? Okay, fine.
Yes.
You find the time. You finally finish your book.
Yeah.
How long does it take before that you actually see this hard?
Right.
this-
So
this-
like, so Repentance was literally 6 years, and I even had a head start because I had already written a couple books, so I had kind of some credibility, and I had already had an agent, etc. But basically, you write your book. Takes a long time to get it to the point where it's good enough. You know, you get it. You may shop it to an agent. You know, I even had an agent who didn't really think it was quite right, and instead of changing it to that individual's desires, I actually found a different agent. You know,
Okay.
so all of these things take time because literally anyone who's evaluating your book takes months to read it because they've got a pile this tall.
Yeah.
Anyway, long story short, you write your book, you have your friends read it, you have your trusted like editors who are your friends help you improve it. You get to the point where you think it's good enough. Then you get your agent to get on board. Your agent is going to make changes.
Yeah.
Finally, get your agent to do it. Then you can do this on your own too. You basically can pitch it to editors and at publishing houses, and then you finally get your publishing deal if all goes decently, and then they will edit it, and then they will copy edit it, and then they will design the interior and the cover, and then they'll have what's called an advanced reader copy, and send that to famous authors who will hopefully blurb for it because they say they like it,
Yeah.
and then there'll be like a months-long promotional campaign. So this is like my book actually launched yesterday.
Okay.
So nationwide, which is great, but it's literally, I signed the book deal for this Repentance book over a year ago. So this whole year has been kind of like this whole long process.
Wow.
So it's extremely illustrative of the principle of delayed gratification. In that way, it's a lot like medicine, you know? It takes a long time.
So what's the Repentance?
Sure.
Where's the title come from? What does it mean?
Well, the Repentance title comes from the fact that this story is about a Japanese-American war hero who has a secret. Something really, really bad happened during the war, and he made a huge mistake. And it's so entwined with the actual combat action that made him a hero that he refuses to speak about the war or what he did. And it's kind of a dual timeline story where he has a son in the 90s who actually is a world-famous cardiac surgeon who actually has a strange relationship with his dad. You know, they haven't gotten along, they haven't spoken for decades. But then the Department of Defense comes knocking on the door, basically trying to find out details about this thing that happened in France while his dad was fighting the Germans because something bad happened, and they don't seem to be wanting to stop until they find out exactly who did what. And that leads the son to embark on kind of a journey of discovery for the truth, searching for the truth. It leads him to California, to France, and slowly, as the book goes on, secret after secret is revealed about his father, what he did, his own childhood, their family, and it's just kind of earth-shattering. So I don't want to give away any spoilers, but repentance refers to mistakes, not just by the father, but also by many characters, several characters in the book. And of course, it touches on what I wanted to highlight historically, the 442nd, and also Japanese internment. So in a way, repentance also, by just remembering the history, is a bit of a way of, our national repentance for this tragedy and mistake that was made in the 40s.
Okay, so we've got 3 books here. I'm going to pull them a little bit closer. Which was the first one?
So to be honest, the first book I wrote was Two Sons of China, but that took literally like 9 years from
is this the first
That's
one
Two
that came
Sons of
out?
China. This was not the first book that was published though, because that took a long time. Well, after you write a book, you basically start thinking to yourself, gosh, what other books could I write, right?
Yep.
So as I had an agent for this book, and I said to myself, gosh, you know what I really like? I'm amazed at this amazing ophthalmological stuff that I get to do, like cataract surgery that's so elegant that all of us will have eventually if we live long enough. LASIK surgery, which is basically just like so futuristic. We're even, like retina surgeons are even starting to implant retinal microchips to bring some sight back to blind people.
Wow.
So I said, I know all these amazing stories of the heroes of my field who basically through serendipity or perseverance, and many of them were ridiculed or ostracized for their newfangled ideas. I think everyone needs to know these stories, but practically nobody does. So I remember going to my agent and I said, I got this great idea. I want to write a book about ophthalmology's heroes. And the agent said, that's never going to work. I said, why not? And she said, well, generally people don't read about medical nonfiction, much less ophthalmological nonfiction. So maybe some nerdy ophthalmologists at their annual meeting would buy this book, but not very many people are. And obviously, her interest is in selling books. And I remember thinking, I was crestfallen. I thought to myself, I said my mom would buy a book, right? So that's another one. So you forgot about her. But basically,
so you got 2 books sold in the hopper, yep.
I didn't give up though. I said to myself, I've got to do something to make this more marketable. And I said, what if I blended my own story as a surgeon and basically took readers into the operating room to show what it's like to try to save sight, or more interestingly perhaps, what it's like when you don't know what to do, when you come up against a very difficult complication, and sometimes frankly it's very hard, like you don't know what to do, things aren't going well, you're freaking out. And I think that honesty about what it's like to be a surgeon is what basically made it take off. It was an Amazon bestseller, and I think that was very helpful.
Here, right?
Yeah,
Saving sight.
That's right. So that book, I was just to give you an idea of how when you get passionate about something, the ideas. I wrote that book in 4 months, and then it got picked up quickly, much quicker than this one. So it's life. It's part of life.
Yeah.
So I wrote that second, but it came out first, and then.
All right. I had.
So that's kind of how it happened.
I don't know if you know Peter Benton. I've had Peter on here talking about his books.
Sure.
Knowing Peter for as long as I have, I'm actually amazed that he could type. But he kind of had a similar situation.
He wrote about some quarry and East Longmeadow, which is interesting.
And his books were out of order in the sense of when he started writing one, because another one came to his mind a little bit sooner. So what's the feeling? You come up with a book, you come up with an idea like this, right? You think it's cool. We've all had those moments where he's like, especially when you own a business or you're in business and you say, this is what I'm going to do. People are going to love it. And then you go talk to someone, they go, nah, I don't think so.
Sure.
Right? So
that's part of life. Rejection
part of life, right?
Is 90% of life. Yeah.
And the only reason this is published is you kept going.
Perseverance, right?
So what's that feeling though when it finally came out?
Oh, it's very gratifying, right? Yeah. The worst thing for me is to do a lot of work and not have it come to fruition. And that happens in every field. It happens a lot in medicine. So like, I've written a lot of scientific papers, and I used to joke around with one of my mentors in residency. He was this world famous guy. Everyone knew who he was. And I was, when you write a paper, you basically pitch it, submit it to all the best journals, because if you get it in there, then you get the credibility of that journal. But then you get these rejections, and then you just keep submitting it again and again to lesser and lesser journals. Okay. And once I had a paper that was like not getting in, And he told me a story. He said, again, this is one of the most famous ophthalmologists in the world, okay? He said, don't worry. Once I submitted something and got into the Journal of Ophthalmology of Saudi Arabia, which is not a place that a journal I've ever heard of. Yeah. So basically, I think that, in this day and age, frankly, when it comes to publishing, a lot of people are actually self-publishing. So I haven't really had to do that, but I think that is certainly a very valuable way, and a lot of good books are coming out that way. So, even if you've struck out with every single publisher known to man, you'd still have a way to get it out there.
Right.
But obviously, to answer your question, certainly it's very gratifying that it comes out. And then, but it's kind of very, it's a little bit of a catch, it's a little bit deceptive because there's always something more, right? Oh, I got a published book, great. Then you want to get people to read the book, right? Yeah. And then you want more people to read the book. So it's never ending, So you have to.
Hopefully your mom read it.
I hope she did. Yeah, hopefully that one didn't scare her too much. My kids haven't read any of them, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how many projects have you thought about starting that died before you got them started because you just said this doesn't work for.
For these books, I've never actually gone to the trouble of writing anything. I may have outlined some ideas, but the thing about me is, the great thing about doing this as a second career is there's no deadlines. You don't have to do it.
Right.
There's no money in this, So there's very little money in this. So I think that I don't bother spending the time writing unless I'm really passionate about it.
Right.
And then if you're passionate about something, you're going to write it even if nobody reads it, just because it's something you're just so excited to do.
Is it cathartic for you that just that getting in that zone and?
Yeah, I don't know if cathartic is the word, because then you'd have to be kind of like recovering from something. Yeah. But no, it's fun. Yeah, I mean, I feel like history has always been something I love, and we all have passions, right? Like I've got several friends, as you I'm sure do, maybe you have, run marathons, and they're waking up literally at 4:30 in the morning to go running, which is crazy to me.
That's stupid.
Yeah, it's just crazy. Why would you suffer, right? So, and in bad weather. So, we all have different things that get us.
Right.
I know you coach a lot, right? So, sports is a great thing, and all the guys who are dedicating that time to our kids. I've always reminded it takes a village. I'm so grateful to the coaches who coach our kids when they do sports, and you can tell that they do it because they like it, right?
Yeah. So obviously this is not something that fits into what you do professionally. So it's not a hand in glove kind of thing that success here will translate over to success in one field versus the other. But you're doing well in both fields. And what's next on the horizon? What's the next thing that? Because you said you already wrote this. It's already it was just released. So
right. So
you just said it's the next one, right?
Oh yeah. So I learned after my first book came out not to talk about what's coming next, because what happens is then everybody will ask you about it, and you have no idea when or if it's actually going to come out. So there were actually interviews I did for Two Sons of China where I mentioned repentance. That was like 6 years ago, 5 years ago maybe. And ever since then, because there were articles written about it.
Okay.
And ever since then, patients have been asking me, when is repentance coming out? And it has been a long time. So I'd rather just avoid all of those questions.
So when you're writing these stories, especially historical, and then weaving a story in there, do you often go back and say, okay, I was going down this road with the story, but I'm going to diverge over to here now because this.
Right.
Does that happen a lot, or?
So, what happens when you write a book like? What I do is we basically outline it, right? So you have some ideas about what the characters and what you want to happen. And there are going to be key points in the narrative that are going to happen. Like this person will live, this person will die, this person will make this mistake, this person will, do this.
Yeah.
And then you start to fill in the details. So before you write, you should probably have a novel anyway. Nonfiction may be different, where it's going to go. And I read, one of my favorite authors is Ken Follett, and you can probably look on his website. His process is very fascinating. It is very effective. He said he'll do that, he'll outline it, then fill in things, and then something will happen. And then what he does to raise suspense is basically take that character that happens to, or that action that character does, and he goes back and he finds a way to make it seem like that, accomplishing that thing or having that experience was that character's greatest ambition or thing that they feared the most. So you basically heighten, this is all the craft of fiction writing basically.
Yeah.
You basically heighten the stakes and then the reader cares, you know? So it's an interesting process. Obviously Ken Follett, I'm nowhere near as good as Ken Follett at it, but that's an interesting way of fiction writing anyway.
So in talking with you, you know, it's funny because I just, like I said, I've had Peter in here and I love talking. I had Gary Brown who wrote a book from the newspaper
Yes,
about
yeah.
all his sports
That's
stories.
right.
It was absolutely fascinating,
That's right.
historical, just going back in history and the types of things, the moments he captured and stuff in his articles, then translated into a book and how these things kind of intertwined with each other, right? But you have a passion. When you talk, like you're smiling the whole time you're talking about your books. Right, so it's obviously it's not.
Am I not smiling in the finance committee meetings?
No, not as much. Not as much. I've noticed
Not as
that.
passionate?
It just depends, I guess, what's going on. You know, when you're talking about fields and stuff, you know, whatever. But no, I mean, it's just you obviously have you get definitely a twinkle in your eye when you're talking about this. So it's more than just like you said. This isn't your moneymaker, right?
No.
This is just pure passion. And your job, though, when you have those quiet times, does it lend to this? Meaning that, you know, when it's a little bit slow, patients are, you know, it's the end of the night kind of thing, and you're just sitting there reflecting to these ideas. Is this on your mind when you're not doing your work, in other words?
I mean, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say it's foremost in my mind these days, like, you know, the kids and stuff and all my various, making sure I haven't forgotten to pick them up or take them somewhere, basically. I just listen to my wife and go where she tells me. But, you know, you're always thinking,
That's
right?
important,
So
not
it
to,
isn't
not to leave
right.
them somewhere, right? Yeah.
It's happened. It happened to me as a child. It's happened to my children. But anyway, I think that, you know, I think it's important to be intellectually curious and always interested in things and in people, right? So I get my inspirations mostly, to be honest, from other people. Like, I love talking to people, learning about what they're passionate about, what they like to do, especially if they've had a different background than me. It's very fascinating. And certainly, like, other inspiration comes from, like, books. I read a lot of history books, movies, travel, you know. So I think you have to be open to new ideas.
Yeah.
And that you never know when the next thing is going to hit you like a lightning bolt and say, gosh, that's a great way to tell this story. Or that's a story worth telling that people would love to know about. You know, like, people know about World War II and there were Japanese internment camps, and maybe they've even heard about these Japanese American soldiers, but they don't know the details. They don't know as much as they would love to if they got the excuse or the reason to do it, right? So the idea here is to entertain them and with an emotional, epic story, and then convey all this amazing history that I am passionate about.
So the other thing that when I'm listening to you is that when you're looking at this book here, Repentance, and you talk about the 442nd, right?
Right.
9,400 Bronze Stars, is that what you said? Out of
4,000 Bronze Stars, 9,486 Purple Hearts.
Purple Hearts. Where do you find all this information? How long are you
Books.
spending you're just doing a lot of research on your own?
Well, you know, it's a lifetime of research in a
Yep.
way. Like, I read constantly history books, and then when you're on a topic, then you read every book or memoir you can find on it. But the internet's very helpful. Like, when you get down to the nitty-gritty of your actual writing, you need the internet to do things like, okay, how many cylinders does a German Opel army truck have? Like, what's the weight of, or what's in their K rations? What do Germans have in their packs? What does their uniform look like? How far does this shell get thrown by this howitzer? You know, the internet is amazing and is very helpful.
Yeah.
I don't know how people did it before. I guess it was fiction.
Yeah.
But it's a thrill for me to basically make it accurate fiction.
Right. So besides the hours of writing and then editing and then submissions, you've had hours and hours of research.
Yes, but
Over time,
it doesn't seem like, right. Absolutely. I mean, you know, Malcolm Gladwell basically said you need 10,000 hours to become an expert at something. I've definitely surpassed that in both medicine and history reading.
Yeah.
But
Wow.
I think that, yeah, it doesn't seem like it, because it's like it's my avocation and my vocation, I guess, in this sense. So.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. They're not interlocked.
Right. It would be like somebody who's an ESPN sportscaster who just loves sports.
Yeah.
They're the ones who are going to sell it. They just love it.
Yeah,
And
they're going to know every statistic in the world.
They pay attention to every sport, all the stats, all through their entire life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So when you've presented these books, Repentance was released yesterday. This is May 2nd that we're talking on, and Andrew will be at the library on May 7th. You may or may not see the show by then. At Storrs Library here in Long Meadow. 6:30,
Right.
talking about the book. And I'm sure these as well. do you on a book tour, or is it just your agent
Yeah.
have you going around doing this?
So I basically don't have the time to go anywhere out of our area.
Yeah.
I wish I did.
Right.
So I'm going to lots of places in the area, like through the summer and the fall, like the Odyssey Bookstore,
Yep.
and then the Barnes & Noble in Holyoke, and I'm going out to Pittsfield at the library there as well. So if you go to andrewlambmd.com, there's a list of the events essentially.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then we can't tell people to go buy your book because then we would violate some FCC rule. But
You can borrow from the library.
If they, where would they go if they would like to find a book that you've written to
They could go to
purchase?
any bookstore,
Is
or
it on
certainly
your-
Amazon.com is
Yep.
probably a great way to get it. BarnesandNoble.com.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Anything else you want to talk about repentance before we end the show?
No, thanks for having me.
Okay. Folks, thank you for watching The Upside. Andrew, thank you for coming in,
Thank
because
you.
this is a great topic. It's one of those things in Longmeadow that, it's right under our nose that we have an author and bringing together some great reading for us. I hope you can make it to the library if you see the show in time. It's May 7th, Tuesday night, 6:30. If you go into stores, you go to the right, there's a room over there. If you can't, go to these other sites that Andrew mentioned, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or andrewlambmd.com.
That's right.
And take a look at the works he has. And thank you for watching The Upside. We'll see you on the next episode. Have a great day. Thank you, sir.
Thanks. Awesome.